4 years ago, Edgar Lungu handed over power in one of Zambia's most peaceful transitions. Since then, President Hakainde Hichilema promised change. But what has really changed for the ordinary Zambian? From corruption crackdowns to the price of mealie meal, we dig into what life looks like after Lungu. In August 2021, Zambia witnessed a moment that would echo across Africa. After years of political tension, economic hardship, and growing calls for change, Edgar Lungu conceded defeat in a peaceful transition of power. His successor, Hakainde Hichilema, promised a new dawn, a Zambia rooted in transparency, economic reform, and democratic renewal. But nearly 4 years later, has anything truly changed? In this InspirAfrica official documentary, we take a neutral, fact-based look at Zambia's post-Lungu era. What progress has been made? What challenges persist? And what do ordinary citizens really feel about the country's direction? This is Zambia after Lungu. What's really changed? Zambia, a landlocked nation in southern Africa, has long been a beacon of relative political stability in a region marked by volatility. Since gaining independence from Britain in 1964, the country has navigated a complex journey through one-party rule, economic challenges, and multi-party democracy. By the early 2000s, Zambia had established itself as a democratic state, though not without flaws. Corruption, economic mismanagement, and political tensions often strained its institutions. The 2021 presidential election, which saw Hakainde Hichilema (HH) defeat incumbent Edgar Lungu, marked a pivotal moment in Zambia's history, raising hopes for transformative change. The stage for this change was set by a confluence of factors. Under Lungu's presidency, 2015 to 2021, Zambia faced mounting economic woes, soaring inflation, a depreciating currency, the kwacha, and a ballooning debt crisis that culminated in the country defaulting on its Eurobond payments in 2020, making it the first African nation to do so during the COVID-19 pandemic. Public frustration grew over allegations of corruption, shrinking democratic space, and a perceived clampdown on civil liberties. Lungu's Patriotic Front (PF) government was accused of authoritarian tendencies, including harassing opposition leaders, restricting press freedom, and manipulating electoral processes. Hichilema, a businessman-turned-politician and leader of the United Party for National Development (UPND), had run for president 5 times before his 2021 victory. His campaign capitalized on widespread discontent, promising economic recovery, anti-corruption reforms, and a restoration of democratic norms. The election, held on August 12, 2021, saw an unprecedented voter turnout of over 70%, reflecting the public's desire for change. HH's landslide victory, securing 2.8 million votes to Lungu's 1.8 million, signaled a mandate for reform. This transition was not just a change of leadership, but a potential turning point for Zambia. Could HH deliver on his promises to reverse economic decline, tackle corruption, and restore democratic freedoms? Or would his administration fall into the same traps as its predecessors? This analysis explores these questions, examining the economic, political, and social dimensions of Zambia's journey under HH's leadership, while critically assessing whether this represents genuine change or a continuation of political rhetoric. Lungu's exit, a peaceful power shift. In 2021, Zambia became a model of African democracy. Amid concerns of rising authoritarianism, Edgar Lungu accepted defeat, handing over power to Hakainde Hichilema, who won with a landslide majority, over 2.8 million votes. It was Hichilema's 6th attempt at the presidency. For many Zambians, it was not just a win for a man, it was a win for democracy itself. HH came into office promising to rebuild the economy, to restore the rule of law, to unite a divided nation. His campaign mantra, "Bali will fix it." But did he? Lungu's exit and HH's entry, the transition from Edgar Lungu to Hakainde Hichilema was a defining moment in Zambia's political history, marked by both hope and tension. Lungu, who came to power in 2015 after the death of President Michael Sata, led the Patriotic Front during a period of economic decline and growing authoritarianism. His administration inherited a relatively stable economy, but faced challenges from falling copper prices, Zambia's primary export, rising debt, and mismanagement. By 2021, public dissatisfaction had reached a boiling point, fueled by economic hardship and allegations of corruption. Lungu's tenure was characterized by several controversial moves. His government was accused of stifling dissent, with opposition leaders, including HH, facing arrests and harassment. The 2016 election, which Lungu narrowly won, was marred by allegations of rigging, leading to a constitutional crisis when HH challenged the results. The closure of the Post, a critical newspaper, and restrictions on public rallies further eroded democratic space. Lungu's attempt to amend the constitution to allow a third term in office sparked widespread protests, with critics arguing he was consolidating power. The 2021 election was a referendum on Lungu's leadership. HH's campaign focused on 3 pillars: economic recovery, anti-corruption, and restoring democratic norms. His slogan, "Bali will fix it," resonated with a population weary of economic hardship and governance failures. The election was relatively peaceful, with international observers, including the African Union and the European Union, noting improvements in electoral transparency compared to 2016. Lungu's concession, though delayed, marked a rare peaceful transfer of power in the region. The transition itself was smooth, but not without challenges. Lungu's Patriotic Front left behind a dire economic situation, including a debt of over $12 billion, 120% of GDP, and depleted foreign reserves. HH's administration had to hit the ground running, navigating a delicate balance between implementing reforms and maintaining political stability. The new government faced immediate pressure to deliver on campaign promises while managing expectations in a polarized political landscape. HH's entry into State House was symbolic for many Zambians. As a former political prisoner under Lungu, his victory represented a triumph over adversity. His business background and promises of technocratic governance inspired confidence among investors and international partners. However, the transition also raised questions about whether HH could unite a divided nation and avoid the pitfalls of vengeance politics, given the acrimony between UPND and PF supporters. The economy, progress, or pressure. When President Hichilema took office, Zambia was facing a debt crisis. The country had become the first in Africa to default on its sovereign debt during the COVID-19 pandemic. The government owed billions to international lenders, including Eurobond holders, Chinese infrastructure creditors, and local banks. HH's team quickly engaged the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and secured a $1.3 billion bailout, promising fiscal discipline in return. Under his leadership, inflation has declined from over 24% in 2021 to single digits. The kwacha briefly stabilized. Fuel subsidies were removed, leading to price hikes. A new national budget emphasized education, healthcare, and decentralization. But the catch: the cost of living remains high for ordinary Zambians. Fuel, food, and transport prices still strain households. Economic performance then versus now. Zambia's economic performance under Lungu and HH provides a critical lens for evaluating the extent of change. Under Lungu, Zambia's economy deteriorated significantly, particularly after 2015. Copper, which accounts for over 70% of export revenue, saw declining global prices, exacerbating fiscal pressures. The government borrowed heavily, accumulating $12.7 billion in external debt by 2020, including $3 billion in Eurobonds and significant loans from China. Inflation soared to 24.6% in 2020, and the kwacha lost over 50% of its value against the dollar between 2015 and 2021. Unemployment, particularly among youth, hovered around 20%, and poverty levels remained high, with over 54% of Zambians living below the poverty line. Lungu's economic policies were criticized for lacking discipline. The expansion of public sector jobs and subsidies, while politically popular, strained the budget. The default on Eurobond payments in November 2020 damaged Zambia's creditworthiness, limiting access to international markets. The COVID-19 pandemic worsened the situation, disrupting trade and reducing government revenue. Since HH took office, there have been notable improvements, though challenges persist. By mid-2025, inflation has been reduced to single digits, around 9.8%, according to posts found on X and Economic Reports. The kwacha has stabilized, gaining about 15% against the dollar in 2023, though it remains volatile. HH's administration secured a $1.3 billion extended credit facility from the IMF in 2022, which provided a lifeline for debt restructuring and fiscal reforms. Debt restructuring talks with creditors, including China, have progressed, with agreements reached to defer payments on $6.3 billion in debt. HH's economic strategy emphasizes fiscal discipline, private sector-led growth, and investment in mining. The revival of Mopani copper mines and Konkola copper mines, previously mismanaged, has boosted investor confidence. Foreign direct investment in the mining sector increased by 20% in 2023, driven by policies to streamline licensing and reduce government interference. The government also expanded the Constituency Development Fund (CDF) to empower local communities, allocating $1.6 billion between 2022 and 2025 for infrastructure and social programs. However, economic recovery is uneven. While urban areas have seen some benefits, rural Zambians, who make up 60% of the population, continue to face high poverty rates. The cost of living remains a concern, with food prices rising despite lower inflation. Unemployment has dropped marginally to 18%, but youth joblessness remains a challenge. Critics argue that HH's policies favor foreign investors over local businesses, and the benefits of debt restructuring are yet to trickle down to ordinary citizens. Comparing the two eras, Lungu's tenure was marked by economic mismanagement and external shocks, while HH has prioritized stabilization and structural reforms. The reduction in inflation and progress on debt restructuring are significant achievements, but the pace of recovery has frustrated some Zambians expecting rapid change. The economy remains vulnerable to global commodity prices and domestic political pressures. Anti-corruption, justice, or selective targeting. Fighting corruption was one of HH's boldest promises. His government declared war on former officials accused of embezzlement, illegally acquired property, public procurement abuse. The Anti-Corruption Commission, ACC, launched high-profile investigations into former ministers, PF members, and government agencies. Some praised it as a long overdue cleanup. Others, particularly from the opposition, called it a witch hunt. The challenge for HH to convince Zambians that accountability isn't political payback, but a genuine effort to reform governance. So far, convictions remain few. Many cases are still under investigation or caught in legal delays. Anti-corruption fight, real or political. Corruption has long been a systemic issue in Zambia, undermining development and eroding public trust. Under Lungu, allegations of graft were rampant, with high-profile cases involving government contracts, mining deals, and public procurement. The Financial Intelligence Center reported illicit financial flows of $2 billion annually during Lungu's tenure, much of it linked to political elites. Critics accused the Anti-Corruption Commission (ACC) of being toothless, selectively targeting opposition figures while shielding PF loyalists. HH campaigned heavily on an anti-corruption platform, promising to strengthen institutions and recover stolen assets. Since taking office, his administration has taken bold steps. The ACC has been revitalized with new leadership and increased funding. Over 50 high-profile investigations have been launched, targeting former PF officials, including ministers and Lungu associates. Assets worth $500 million, including properties and cash, have been seized or frozen. The establishment of fast-track anti-corruption courts has expedited cases, with several convictions secured by 2025. However, the anti-corruption drive has sparked debate over its impartiality. Critics, including PF supporters, argue that HH's government is engaging in a witch hunt, disproportionately targeting political opponents while sparing UPND allies. For example, investigations into Lungu's inner circle have been widely publicized, but similar scrutiny of UPND figures is notably absent. The arrest of former officials has been criticized as selective justice, with some cases lacking transparent evidence. On the other hand, supporters argue that the scale of corruption under Lungu necessitates aggressive action. The recovery of assets and the strengthening of institutions like the ACC and the Drug Enforcement Commission demonstrate commitment to reform. International partners, including Transparency International, have praised Zambia's progress, noting an improvement in its Corruption Perceptions Index, ranking from 117th in 2020 to 98th in 2024. The challenge lies in balancing accountability with fairness. If perceived as politically motivated, the anti-corruption fight risks deepening divisions and undermining public trust. HH's administration must ensure investigations are transparent, evidence-based, and inclusive of all political factions to establish credibility. Democracy and press freedom. Have things improved? During Edgar Lungu's final years, Zambia's press environment came under growing strain. Independent outlets like the Post and Prime TV were shut down. Opposition parties struggled to access state media, and civil society often operated under threat. When HH took office, he promised to restore media freedom and respect for civil space. Since 2021, several changes have been noted. Independent stations reopened, including Prime TV. Journalists have reported less government interference. Civil society organizations operate more openly, yet critics say press freedom still isn't absolute. UPND-aligned media now dominates narratives. Some opposition figures allege they're silenced in new ways through legal tactics, online harassment, or biased coverage. So while the environment may feel freer, true independence still remains a work in progress. Civil liberties, press, and political space. Under Lungu, Zambia's democratic space contracted significantly. The Public Order Act was used to restrict opposition rallies, and police crackdowns on protests led to accusations of human rights abuses. The closure of the Post in 2016 and harassment of journalists signaled a decline in press freedom. The 2016 and 2020 elections were criticized for voter intimidation and media bias, with state-controlled outlets favoring the PF. Opposition leaders, including HH, faced repeated arrests, and civil society groups reported shrinking space for dissent. HH's administration promised to reverse these trends. The Public Order Act has been amended to ease restrictions on public gatherings, and police have been instructed to adopt a more restrained approach to protests. Media freedom has improved, with private outlets operating with less fear of reprisal. The Zambia National Broadcasting Corporation, ZNBC, has seen reforms to reduce government influence, though critics argue it still leans toward UPND. Civil liberties have seen progress, but not without setbacks. The release of political prisoners, including those detained under Lungu, was an early win. However, reports of harassment of PF supporters and restrictions on their rallies have raised concerns about selective application of freedoms. The judiciary, while more independent than under Lungu, faces accusations of bias in politically sensitive cases. Public sentiment, as reflected in posts on X, is mixed. Some Some Zambians praise the expanded space for expression, citing fewer arrests of journalists and activists. Others argue that HH's government tolerates dissent only when it aligns with UPND interests. The repeal of the defamation of the president law in 2022 was a significant step, but its impact is limited by new cybercrime laws that critics say could be used to silence online dissent. Zambia's ranking on the World Press Freedom Index improved from 120th in 2021 to 90th in 2024, reflecting progress. However, ensuring genuine democratic space requires consistent application of reforms across all political factions and addressing lingering mistrust from the Lungu era. Foreign policy: a shift in alliances. Under Lungu, Zambia developed deep economic ties with China, securing loans for roads, airports, and power projects. But with the debt burden rising, the Hichilema administration has taken a more Western-leaning approach. President HH has strengthened ties with the IMF and World Bank, engaged more openly with the United States and EU, criticized opaque deals, and pushed for transparency in Chinese projects. At the same time, Zambia remains part of regional blocs like SADC and the African Union, often positioning itself as a neutral mediator in continental matters. For some, this global rebalancing is smart diplomacy. For others, it's a move that risks overdependence on the West. Foreign policy and Zambia's global image. Lungu's foreign policy was pragmatic but heavily reliant on Chinese investment, which fueled debt concerns. Zambia's default in 2020 damaged its global reputation, portraying it as a cautionary tale of overborrowing. Relations with Western nations were strained due to democratic backsliding, with the EU and US criticizing electoral irregularities and human rights abuses. HH has recalibrated Zambia's foreign policy, balancing relations with Western and Eastern powers. His administration's engagement with the IMF and successful debt restructuring talks have restored Zambia's credibility in international markets. HH's frequent international trips, over 30 since 2021, have positioned him as a regional advocate for democracy and economic reform. Zambia's hosting of the 2023 African Union Summit and HH's role in mediating regional conflicts, such as in the Democratic Republic of Congo, have elevated its global profile. Relations with China remain strong, with renegotiated loan terms easing debt pressures. However, HH has diversified partnerships, securing investments from the US, EU, and Canada, particularly in green energy and mining. Zambia's commitment to renewable energy, including a $2 billion solar project, has earned praise from climate-focused organizations. Critics argue that HH's foreign policy prioritizes Western approval over regional solidarity, potentially alienating African allies. The reliance on foreign investment also raises concerns about sovereignty, with some Zambians wary of multinational corporations dominating the mining sector. Nonetheless, Zambia's improved global image, evidenced by its re-entry into international bond markets in 2024, marks a significant shift from the isolation of the Lungu years. The people speak: is life better now? Policy changes are one thing, but what do ordinary Zambians say? Studio microphone: a Lusaka taxi driver says, yes, the corruption has reduced, but fuel prices are killing us. So what's the benefit? Studio microphone: a university student says, we have more freedom to speak now, but we want jobs, not just speeches. Studio microphone: a PF loyalist in Eastern Province says, Lungu was not perfect, but people ate. Now it's just promises and foreign meetings. Studio microphone: a small business owner in Kitwe says, HH is trying, but the system is big. It will take time. Across Zambia, public opinion is divided but hopeful. Many citizens appreciate greater transparency, but feel the benefits haven't reached them yet. Voices from the ground: what Zambians say. Public sentiment is a critical barometer of HH's performance. Surveys and social media posts reveal a polarized nation. A 2023 Afrobarometer survey found that 60% of Zambians approved of HH's leadership, citing economic stabilization and anti-corruption efforts. Rural communities benefiting from the expanded CDF report improved access to schools and clinics. Urban youth, however, express frustration over persistent unemployment and high living costs. On X, opinions vary widely. Some users celebrate the drop in inflation to 10.2% and praise HH's technocratic approach. Others accuse him of favoring his ethnic base in Southern Province and neglecting other regions. PF supporters claim the anti-corruption drive is a vendetta, while UPND supporters view it as long overdue justice. Traders in Lusaka's markets, interviewed in local media, complain about slow economic trickle-down, while miners in the Copperbelt appreciate job opportunities from revived mines. Civil society voices highlight progress in governance, but warn of democratic fragility. Youth activists demand faster job creation, while traditional leaders call for inclusive development. The church, a powerful influence in Zambia, has praised HH's moral leadership, but urged restraint in political prosecutions. These voices reflect a nation grappling with high expectations and uneven progress. While many Zambians see HH as a break from the past, others remain skeptical, awaiting tangible improvements in the their daily lives. Final reflections, real change or political rebranding. Edgar Lungu left office peacefully, a rare legacy in African politics. Hakainde Hichilema entered with promises of change, and he has made moves. But nearly 4 years later, the core question remains. Has Zambia truly entered a new era, or is it just a new face on the same system? What's clear is this: democracy survived, institutions were tested, and the Zambian people remain the ultimate judges. Only time will tell if this is the beginning of lasting transformation or just another political cycle. Conclusion: is this real change? HH's presidency has undeniably brought change to Zambia. Economic stabilization, progress in debt restructuring, and improvements in civil liberties mark a departure from Lungu's era of mismanagement and democratic erosion. The anti-corruption fight, while controversial, has yielded results, and Zambia's global image has improved significantly. However, challenges remain. Economic benefits are slow to reach the masses, and accusations of political bias threaten to undermine reforms. Is this real change? The answer depends on perspective. For those prioritizing macroeconomic stability and institutional reform, HH's tenure is a success. For others, particularly the unemployed youth and rural poor, change feels superficial. The true test lies in sustaining reforms, ensuring inclusivity, and delivering on promises of equitable growth. Zambia stands at a crossroads, with HH's leadership offering hope, but requiring vigilance to avoid repeating past mistakes.